Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I am Jeremy Birmingham. It's Monday. It's December the 19th, 2022. That's Bill Landis. The world is still ending in Columbus, but that's the way it goes. Ohio State football, the circus does not seem to want to slow down, Bill, over the weekend. How do I say this? The least important bit of bad news that makes the biggest splash probably that you could ever want to happen happened as number one ranked player in the class of 2024. So he's a rising senior. He'll be a senior next year. Dylan Raiola decommitted from Ohio State, reopened his recruitment, and put the Buckeyes in a position now where they have to go back to the drawing board to search for a quarterback in the class of 2024. About 4 days after picking up their class of 2023 quarterback, where they had to go back to the drawing board to pick him up after a decommitment from Brock Glenn a month ago. It does seem, and I don't want to be woe is us, but it does seem that covering Ohio State has more day-to-day drama than any other program in the country. Would you agree or disagree?
I would agree. Without experience in covering another team, I would agree. This time of year in particular, you're kind of walking on eggshells a little bit and trying to figure out what's the next thing to happen, whether it's in the recruiting or transfers or coaching staff or the college football playoff that Ohio State is still preparing to play. And it's like, I get that. I understand if you're an Ohio State fan, if you were bummed, if you were upset, if you were mad about Dylan Raiola decommitting and feeling like this is a terrible time to be an Ohio State fan. My rebuttal to that would be, you're in the playoff. So it's not all that bad, but it could be better.
Yeah. In the playoff for the third time in 4 years. They just picked up the country's number one ranked wide receiver commitment in the class of 2024 3 days ago. That again doesn't remove any of the sting here that happens when you lose Raiola, simply because his upside and his prospective future is better than pretty much any quarterback we've seen in the last 10 years or so. And so that is a challenge. The real challenge with this, Bill, is that there isn't a clear-cut definitive answer as to what happened. Ryan Day was at Chandler's final playoff game of the season 2 weeks ago. I mean, he was there 2 weeks ago in Arizona seeing Raiola play. There's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of rumors about what it could be. There's some who are saying, oh, he's definitely going to Nebraska because that's where his uncle is. That's where his father was a Hall of Famer. And now that Matt Rule's there, and there's a push from Nebraska with a lot of millions of dollars in NIL opportunities, that he's just decided I'm ready to make that plunge. I don't know if that's it. There's rumors that other schools like TCU have given him a huge amount of opportunity. And obviously they're playing pretty well. They're in the playoff. His sister plays volleyball there. The family lived there for a couple of years. There's that. There's, rumors that Lincoln Riley and USC and watching the way that Caleb Williams played this year versus the way CJ Stroud played this year had some sort of impact. There are rumors that Ohio State did something to make him mad in the way that they dealt with Brock Glenn and Lincoln Keenholz. Like, all of these things are sort of floating around, and I don't know that it's one thing or the other. It's probably a combination of all these things, and coupled with the fact that he committed in May of his junior year of high school, May of his sophomore year of high school. He hadn't started his junior year yet. I think all those things just sort of come to a head, and you see why oftentimes it is a major risk to take a commitment from any player that early, let alone one that lives 2,000 miles away.
Yeah, and especially a quarterback too. And Ohio State's track record of taking quarterbacks that early is not particularly good. The good thing for Ohio State is that it's always ended up with a pretty good quarterback, so they've been no worse for wear. But I was always kind of worried about that when they took Dylan so early. I get why you do. When a kid who's that talented, who has that kind of upside, says, "Hey, I want in," you say, "Yeah, of course, let's do this." But it was always going to be a battle, I think, to keep him into the class. That's not to say that this wasn't surprising, because it was for me. I don't know if it was for you. The thing that I wonder about is, and you would have better insight on this than I do, the 2023 cycle, with the way that went for Ohio State. It was slow going, and then obviously it looked like it was going to be a couple different guys throughout that process. Like, for the Raiolas, like, how important was it to them that they be plugged in throughout that process to see who would be coming in ahead of Dylan, maybe even who would be coming in behind Dylan, and what you think of how Ohio State handled that?
I think it was very important to them that they were dialed in, and this is part of the the risk you run. See, there's these two trains of thought. There's, you go get a quarterback who has an NFL pedigree, all of the bloodlines that you want. Those types of families have a very specific idea of what they're looking for and what they want. And I don't want to say high expectations of exactly how things are supposed to go, but they definitely believe that they have and rightfully have a voice in every decision that gets made thereafter. That's fair or unfair. I think that's part of the issue. When I wonder if it's more about being annoyed that Brock Glenn was pretty much removed from the class without talking to Raiola. I mean, this is totally subjective, and pardon me, I'm hypothetical. More so than like adding Keenholz or someone else. I think what sucks for Ohio State is that because Raiola committed so early, Ohio State decided to pretty much punt on the 2023 quarterback class around the country and not go after guys like Dante Moore, who, is from Detroit or lives in Detroit, but's from Cleveland, who committed to Oregon and now looks like he's going to flip to UCLA. He's the number 2 ranked quarterback in the country. If you knew that Raiola wasn't going to be in the class, you probably make a harder push for Dante Moore, and may have been able to make some hay there. There are other players around the country that they really felt like, hey, we could get in this cycle if you don't have Raiola in the class, but you sort of punted on that class. And now, rather than being able to go get those guys, you're now behind in the class of 2024 because players around the country, like Julian Sayin out in California and DJ Lagway from Texas, who committed to Florida. There's a kid up in the Northeast who, that's Ryan Day's area, who's committed to Georgia in that class. Like, there's a couple guys that they probably could have made a push for and made some real, traction with over these last 6 months. And not to mention Jaden Davis, who is a favorite of a lot of people's in the Ohio State circle, because it was sort of expected that before Raiola emerged as the clear-cut front runner, that Dylan or Jaden Davis was going to be the guy. And now looks like he's going to end up having to choose between Clemson and Michigan because he feels, probably rightfully so, that Ohio State spurned him. And he's a 5-star quarterback, and you give Michigan probably a 5-star quarterback because you chose Raiola, who now has defected. So it just puts a lot of pressure on things. It doesn't matter because, as you said, there's a year to go until signing day for the class of 2024. Ohio State will turn out fine at quarterback, but in general, the program had no choice but to take a 2023 quarterback, and they probably still need to take a transfer portal quarterback that's a veteran, because you can't go into the 2023 season with 3 guys that have thrown a combined 10 passes in their career. You need to have somebody else in that room, whether it's a Chris Chuganoff or Gunnar Hoke type or not, or someone that's actually going to compete for the starting job. I don't know, but it's just, this is college football, and welcome to the madness. I mean, I think that what you run into, and exactly what you said, like, there's the transfer portal, there's signing day coming up in 3 days, there's preparing for the playoff, there's all the coaching carousel. All this is happening at once, and I think that sometimes a commitment or a decommitment like the one from Raiola can sort of sneak up on you, because you think, hey, let's just get through December here, and we'll figure out how to fix that relationship next month, or amend any sort of issues that maybe have come up, and then you don't get the chance.
Yeah, I mean, my prevailing thought on the whole thing is like they're going to be fine because there is a year until they have to find a quarterback. And when they've been in this position in the past, they've usually found a good one. Now, if you want to say to yourself, like, well, Dylan is supposed to be, the next Trevor Lawrence or Vince Young or whatever.
Patrick Mahomes,
whoever you get is not going to be quite as good as him. That's fine. Like, I've watched his high school highlights too. He looks like he's going to be awesome. And I watched him throw in person when he was here in Columbus camping. Like, he looks the part in every way you'd want him to. I still think Ohio State can find itself a good quarterback, but I guess it does invite questions, Berm, of, like, it's the biggest high profile, it's the highest profile decommitment you could have. The timing is not so bad, but it's the caliber of player in the position is the highest profile decommitment you can have. And I think people, when they see that, want to know, is it indicative of any issues with, like, the program or the way it's going about its recruiting business right now? Or is it just like quarterback recruiting is tough and this is a very early quarterback commitment, which makes it even tougher? Like, where do you land on that?
I land somewhere in the middle of there should have been, from the time that Dylan Raiola committed to Ohio State to now, and I mean this in the nicest possible way, there should be nobody other than Ryan Day talking to Dylan Raiola and his family, like from Ohio State. I don't think that that's the type of recruitment that you can defer to anyone else, even though Corey Dennis played a big role in the recruitment and the commitment. I think logically speaking and thinking, if we forecast 3 years down the road from now when Dylan Raiola is in his sophomore year at Ohio State, is it more likely that Raiola would be there or Corey Dennis would be there? Yeah. And so, that would be 10 years in the program for Corey Dennis. That seems unlikely. I'd imagine he'll have an opportunity to move on somewhere. I just think that maybe, and I'm not suggesting or saying, or even, I'm certainly not definitively stating that Ryan Day has deferred the relationship building part to Corey Dennis. I know, as I said, Day was there 2 weeks ago himself when he didn't have to be. But I do wonder if there was some wires crossed in conversation and communication, because you have multiple people handling it. Beyond that, how many national championships did Patrick Mahomes win at Texas Tech?
Let me think. None. Yeah. How
many is Stetson Bennett trying to win at Georgia now?
He's got a pretty good shot at winning too.
So, like, I don't know. I mean, I know that quarterback is the driver of every program, and you need to have a great one. But I also realize that if you have a really great defense and big time players around you, you can get by in college football without it. This is not the NFL where you have to have the best quarterback in the league to be successful. Period. It's just not. So you look at a guy like Lincoln Keenholz or Devin Brown or Kyle McCord, that's 2 5-star quarterbacks, and a guy who's now the number 5 ranked player in the country in the class of 2023 at the position. So you have talent there, and they're going to find a great one in the class of 2024. And who knows? There's plenty of time left. If Ryan Day really is able to, put himself in front of the Raiolas and say, hey, we botched this, or this is, talk to us about this. Maybe you get back involved. I mean, there's a reason that Raiola committed when he did. I'm not saying it's completely over there. I do think that it's now an uphill battle, because that's just what happens when you take a step back. But generally speaking, I think Ohio State will be fine. It doesn't make anyone feel better about what happened, but that's the way it is. Bill, signing day, the early signing period starts on Wednesday. We could talk more about Raiola, but that, as you said, is a year away from now. The early signing period for the class of 2023 is not a year from now. It's about 48 hours from now. So it's time to start really dialing in on this class, which, with the commitment of Keenholz last week, has 20 commitments. Ohio State is going to find out for sure this week on Mateo Uiagalelei on Wednesday. They'll find out for sure if they lost Damon Wilson to Georgia, which I feel they will. And at that point, it's really about hang on to the guys you got, figure out the transfer portal, who you're bringing in, who you're bringing out. The Buckeyes hosted a number of players over the weekend, 3 different offensive linemen, a tight end from Maryland. They picked up a long snapper from Arizona State, who I doubt will be on scholarship, but you just don't know. So, we're watching as they try to handle roster construction in the middle of the playoff preparation. But the biggest thing for Ohio State ultimately right now is to get all 20 guys that they have committed signed on Wednesday. And that's seems like it's trending in that direction, but there's still the unknowns when it comes to tight end Jelani Thurman and Auburn, who, he visited the Tigers 7 times or something like that during the season. Yeah. 6 of those times they didn't have a head coach. So like you can be like, oh, who cares? But now obviously Hugh Freeze is there, and they're trying to make some waves on the Plains. And the same can be said for Kayan Lee, the cornerback from Cedar Grove High School in Ellenwood, Georgia, who also visited Auburn a handful of times, who took an official visit to Auburn 2 weekends ago. And so you do have to worry about those 2, I think. But the Buckeyes believe that they've navigated the rocky waters there. So other than that, as you look at this class, and just so everyone knows, this is not planned, so I'm putting Bill on the spot. Obviously, you have the wide receiver group, which is spectacular. You have 3 players in Brandon Ennis, Carnell Tate, and Noah Rogers, who are borderline 5-star prospects in the composite / consensus game. Each of them is a 5-star on different networks. And then you have Bryson Rogers, who Ohio State was took first in this class above all the other receivers because they really believe he's a steal. Other than wide receiver, what position do you look at and say, I really like what I see there versus I have concerns?
I really like the cornerback position, and that's probably contingent on them being able to keep Kay and Lee. But even if they weren't, and it's just like Jermaine Matthews and Calvin Simpson-Hunt, honestly, if that was like a 2-man corner class, I think that's a great class. I was there at that camp in June when Jermaine Matthews like put on a show and was like almost talking smack to the Ohio State coaches to give him the offer that he felt like he deserved at that time. And I just love his mentality and his skill and his talent, obviously, at the position as well. So like you bring in a guy like that who I think can help the room, and Calvin Simpson-Hunt, who's just one of the better pure athletes in the country. I think Ohio State needs an infusion of that in its cornerback room. I know if you look at some of the recruiting sites, maybe it's not like, oh, they're not, bona fide 5-stars, although some services do think they are. Maybe that leaves you wanting more from that position, but I thought it was a major position of need in this class, and they've done a pretty good job of addressing it. If I had to pick the flip side of that, I might go to safety, and I like Malik Hartford quite a bit. And maybe that's just sort of the letdown of thinking at a time they were going to get Caleb Downs or seem well positioned to get Caleb Downs. And I suppose that's still a possibility that hasn't been resolved just yet. But that was a position where I thought to myself, like, man, they could really use a difference maker at safety. And maybe that is Malik Hartford down the road, but I can't help but think like what could have been had they been able to really land Caleb Downs, and maybe they will, and I'll think differently, but that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah. When you have, Cedric Hawkins, who committed very early in this class at safety. And so my issue with the Cedric Hawkins commitment is that I don't know that his position of safety really fits any differently than Kay and Lee does at cornerback. If you're looking at a guy who's just likely a nickel, third corner, that being the case, I like what I see out of both those guys. They're both really aggressive. Cedric Hawkins plays both ways down at Cocoa in Florida and is a state champion, and is a guy that has had opportunities to move elsewhere and has chosen not to. Jaden Bonsu, the big time, linebacker body type from New Jersey. I wonder if he's sort of a Josh Proctor-esque type safety. Hopefully you'll see him get a chance to show his ability to cover early in his career and not just grow out of the position. I think that's the issue with someone like Downs, who Ohio State is still hoping for. It seems likely he'll sign with Alabama on Wednesday. He was back in Tuscaloosa this weekend for their big final recruiting weekend of the year, which is sort of just a camaraderie weekend. And that sucks for Ohio State because you hope that you get the last opportunity to talk to him, and they would have had that with their at-home visit that they did on Tuesday night last week. So now you just are hoping that Caleb Downs wakes up on Wednesday morning and follows whatever it is that could lead him to Ohio State, because he is the best player in the country, without exception, without positional regard. He is the best player in the country. So, I look at corner. I think there's been a lot of unfair criticism of what Tim Walton has done on the recruiting trail this year, because I really do believe also that Jermaine Matthews and Calvin Simpson-Hunt are two of the top 5 cornerbacks in the nation. And not just the way that they're built, not the way they run, but just their attitude. They are both like really aggressive, very, I don't want to use the word cocky, but I'm going to use the word cocky. They're guys that are very self-assured on the field. And Calvin Simpson-Hunt is a freaky athlete who is talked about basically nowhere by anyone because he doesn't talk to anyone about anything or anybody. So like, we don't really know anything about the kid. He committed to Ohio State in June and has not done an interview since. He doesn't have any interest in it. That I think because of what's happened in the last few cycles, when you lose guys like Terrence Brooks last year to Texas, people probably are like, oh no, is he going to flip? There's been no indication of anything like that or a last minute signing day surprise with him. So I think you're good there. Ultimately, Ohio State, I think, would love to have done a better job at defensive end in this class, no matter what happens. If you end up with just Mateo Uiagalelei, that's a 5-star defensive end. That's great. There's no guarantee they're gonna. USC and Oregon are highly involved. As you get closer to signing day, the push to stay closer to home becomes more and more real for kids, because the idea of, hey, do I really want to travel 2,700 miles away from home becomes a harder pill to swallow. Ohio State's done a great job with Mateo. They've been the leader in that recruitment for the last year. I guess we'll see in the next couple of days. I think, you can't get past the disappointment of potentially finishing second for Damon Wilson easily. That's something that's going to haunt Ryan Day and his coaching staff for a bit. But if you take those guys and you have the 3-man defensive tackle group, which I really do like, with Will Smith, who was leaps and bounds better as a senior than he was as a junior at Dublin Coffin High School outside of Columbus. That's obviously Ohio State legacy. Will Smith, his father was an All-American and national champion for the Buckeyes. If you put him and Caden McDonald, who I think if Caden McDonald was 6'4" instead of 6'2", he's probably a top 15 player in the country. He is just a different type of defensive tackle. 6'2", 320 pounds. Dude plays fullback for his high school team and runs the ball pretty well. Like, he's an athlete. He's not just extremely quick first step. I think he's just too short. If you look for what Georgia's looking for now, which I think is the standard, if he was 6'4", 330, he would have been committed to Georgia a year ago. But unfortunately for Caden, he's 6'2". Fortunately for Ohio State, you have an opportunity to get like a Geno Atkins type defensive tackle who can really be a difference maker. It's like if BB Landers was 3 inches taller, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like that type of player. And then you have Jason Moore, who on the far opposite end of that spectrum is almost 6'7" at defensive tackle, which Ohio State has never had an interior defensive lineman of that size at 6'6", 280 pounds. I don't know if he's going to stay a pure inside guy. I think that his length allows you to move him around. But they believe he's an inside guy at first, for sure. And Jason Moore, Rivals has had him as the number 1 ranked defensive tackle in the country. That's a pretty good 3-man group, as long as you're able to complement it with someone on the defensive end. And again, even a guy like Mateo Uiagalelei, who is obviously the primary prospect to look at this point, he's 6'6", 280 pounds. So it's not, it's funny how you see two guys who are the same size and you project them so differently, but Mateo could be an All-American type tight end if he had the opportunity. And I think that's actually, part of what makes him so unique is his athleticism is rare.
I was going to say defensive end when you asked about positions that are leaving a little something to be desired, but then Jason Moore kind of got into my head, and I thought to myself, well, if he, I think he can play in, as you alluded to. So like if he can, you start to feel a little bit better about that. I like Caden McDonald a lot. I think, or at least I found myself wondering about defensive line recruiting, because I'm not entirely sure that what Larry Johnson has done historically and what Jim Knowles would prefer from the tackle position exactly link up. And I wondered if there'd be a little bit of a combined effort there to kind of find guys that sort of suit what both coaches like. And I think Caden McDonald is the kind of space eater that Jim Knowles would prefer to play at tackle. But Larry still went out and got his Jason Moore guy, who's a 3-tech defensive end, long levered, kind of, the Draymond Jones type of guys that Larry always seems to fall in love with and does a really good job of developing too. And I like Will Smith as well. I actually went and watched Will Smith play earlier in September. I forget who they played, but just got to watch him move, because the only time I've ever seen him play or do stuff was at a camp, and that's one thing, but to see him do it in a game is another. And he went up against a fairly good offensive line too in that game that I watched him play, and he's clearly moving really well. He's much bigger than he was the first time I saw him last year. So I think the development track is what you want it to be. So it's a good class. I think it could be better, and you're right. It's the real gut punches are the recruitments like Damon Wilson, where you do feel like you've done everything you possibly can to position yourself as well as you could, and then you still end up finishing second. So even if they get Mateo, I still think that Damon Wilson recruitment leaves a pretty sour taste in your mouth.
Yeah, I agree. And that's what makes it difficult, but it also it's what makes Mateo Uiagalelei that much more important. Ohio State would probably be looking in the transfer portal for another defensive end if they can find one that fits. The portal, we could probably talk a little bit more at length about that and how it relates to Ohio State's recruiting efforts. But one of the things you brought up, and I think it's an interesting point and something we haven't really been able to get much of an answer of this year. I'm hoping that I get an opportunity to sit do with Ryan Day this week and do a Bermanology episode with him like we've done the last 4 or 5 years when it comes to signing day. But I am curious with Jim Knowles being the head coach of the defense, and he's not called the defensive coordinator. He's called the head coach of the defense. I do wonder how much input he has on choosing guys for his unit. Larry Johnson is one of the few coaches at Ohio State for the last 8, 9, 10 years who has had the ability, sort of carte blanche, to do whatever he wants to do at the position he recruits. Brian Hartline's getting into that stratosphere now, where it doesn't matter if other coaches want the guy. If Brian Hartline wants the guy at wide receiver, then he's allowed to go recruit him. It's not always been that way at every other position. I do wonder if Jim Knowles, being relatively new to this level of college football recruiting and this type of life and that you have at Ohio State, if he's allowed Larry Johnson, or if Ryan Day and Jim Knowles have said, hey, you know what, Larry's going to do what Larry's going to do. And because I think the biggest issue for Larry Johnson in this cycle was just sort of identifying 3 defensive ends and sticking with them and not even looking at others, because that's why you're in this position now where we're 2 days before signing day. And not only are you in a position where you've lost Keon Keeley to Alabama when he committed there a week ago, you very likely will lose Damon Wilson to Georgia, and you're at least, what's the word I'm looking for? Cautiously optimistic that you'll be able to keep Mateo Uiagalelei as the guy, but you're not confident. And that's a tough pill to swallow for Ohio State, because this is a class, knowing that you were going to lose Zach Harrison this year, knowing that you're almost certain in one way or another to lose JT Tuimoloau and maybe Jack Sawyer next year. You didn't go out and get 2 big time defensive ends in this class. That's a kick in the pants.
It is. To that point, a guy whose name we have not mentioned yet, Joshua Mickens. What's going on with him?
Well, Joshua Mickens is certainly a guy that Ohio State is still looking hard at, Lawrence Central High School in Indianapolis. But now, if you're talking about Jim Knowles' defense, this is the guy that fits it. He's a 6'3", 230 pound edge rusher. This is the guy that you recruit at the Jack/Leo/ whatever the name of the position is at Ohio State. He's listed as a defensive end according to all of the rankings departments around the country, but he is a stand-up Jack type player. Now, he is a guy that believes he might be better with his hand in the dirt. This is just funny how it works, because if you look at a guy like Keon Keeley, who Ohio State has said who plays with his hand in the dirt at Berkeley High School in Tampa, Ohio State said, you're definitely a 4-3 defensive end. He wants to be a 3-4 stand-up outside linebacker, which is one of the reasons why he picked Alabama. You have Josh Mickens, who on the other side of it is playing defensive end at 6'3", 230 pounds, wants to stay with his hand in the ground. Ohio State saying, you're definitely not a stand at home. You can do it, but it's not your position. I look at him very similar to Jonathan Cooper and what we saw Jonathan Cooper do in high school. He was a 5-star, top 25 player in the country. But everyone saw him and thought to yourself, man, if you just play this guy at linebacker and you let him kind of run around a little bit, he might be more productive. We watched Cooper have a decent Ohio State career. Obviously, he made a lot of impact on the program that wasn't statistically driven. But now you see him in the NFL as a 7th round pick, who's playing a lot of minutes for the Denver Broncos as an outside linebacker. And so that's where they see Joshua Mickens heading. He will make a decision public on January 7th at the All-American Bowl. But he will sign this week, but the hope is on his part that no one knows where he signs. So I don't know that there's anybody really other than Ohio State involved in the battle right now, unless Indiana or someone like that is able to keep him closer to home. But LSU, where he had been committed for a while, is a little bit far away. His father passed away this year, and so he's decided that he wants to stay more in the Midwest. So that's opened up the door for Ohio State. I would expect him to sign with Ohio State, but I don't think you'll know until January 7th for sure.
I find his recruitment very interesting, just because I wondered when Jim Knowles got here how much they would actually recruit to that Jack Leo position, or if they would just recruit like they normally did and then find a guy they think they can play it. This to me looks like they're actually actively recruiting body types and skill sets for that position, which is interesting. I wasn't so sure they would do that.
And his senior season is one that's a little bit fascinating to watch. Again, as I mentioned, his father passed away earlier this year. He started his senior season, did not play very well. I was there at his high school a few weeks ago. His coach said that he had to bench him early in the season and say, you either need to figure out what's going on with your emotions and get yourself right. Otherwise, you're not helping the team. And he started to see a sports psychologist just to try to get himself and to completely change his entire direction. And then from there on, Ohio State started watching film from that moment on. He called it the new Josh. And his coach actually told me it wasn't the new Josh, it was just the old Josh. But in his mind, it was a complete something he needed to do. And from then on, he's been a totally different player, and one that really popped on the film for Ohio State, which is why they're in that position. His coach actually played with Justin Fry at Indiana, so you have a little bit of a tie in there, and that's how Ohio State opened that door. But really good player, and certainly not a guy that Ohio State fans should just dismiss if he does sign with the Buckeyes. But if you're looking at him as a defensive end, which I think people are talking about, how do you fill that spot? Then he may not be that guy.
If I can ask you, I want to look on the other side of the ball on offense. How do you come away feeling about offensive tackle recruiting in this cycle?
I don't know if they have one. That's bad. Miles Walker is the more like natural offensive tackle prospect in this class, and similar to like guys like Kelvin Simpson Hunt, Miles Walker just does not talk. He's not interested in recruiting, media, anything. I actually had a brief text message conversation with him the week before the Michigan game when he came up to Columbus for his official visit. He said he wanted to get on the podcast and do a terminology, and then when he got back, he's like, I'm actually not interested. That's just not something I want to do. I'm like, okay, well, we tried. His frame is much more that natural tackle body than someone like Luke Montgomery, who I think will have an opportunity to start his career at the offensive tackle position. I have long believed that Luke's best position may be center, because I just watched him play there one time and really thought that his athleticism at center is a game changer if you can put a guy like that there. He's only played that spot one time in his career in high school. It was a game against Toledo Whitmer his junior year, because he had to play it because the 4 other guys on the team were sick, and so he had to jump in and play, and he was great. And I was like, wow, that's very fascinating to me. Like, you're talking like a Jason Kelsey type, really athletic, 6'5", 300-pound center who can do a lot of things. So if it's not Luke playing center, it's a couple years down the road for Miles Walker, and that's why Ohio State is in a position right now where they absolutely desperately need to find a tackle in the transfer portal. The question is, who makes the most sense and who's the best fit? Is it a guy that has 2 or 3 years of eligibility, or is it a 1-year rental? I don't think that the Buckeyes did a poor job at this cycle recruiting the offensive line. I like what they did with the 4 guys, but 3 of them are sort of layups when you have Padilla, Saraveld, and Montgomery all in your backyard. And then you have a project in Miles Walker, who, again, very athletic, but not the big name that people would want to see in the class. And so the question is, does it require a reevaluation of how important tackles are on the recruiting trail, because they're so rare to find the true ones, that they are valued, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, almost similarly to quarterbacks around the nation. And so it's one of those spots where Ohio State, like at quarterback, the Buckeyes have a natural salve, so to speak, to fix what happens there in the recruiting world, because Ryan Day's philosophies and his track record are good enough that you can sort of get past that hiccup, that bag of cash in the road. I'm sorry, the speed bump that you have to get over. They don't have that yet at tackle, and Justin Fry's cachet lacks where Ryan Day's does at this point. So that maybe gets easier after May, when you maybe have 2 first-round picks, but that is not the case right now in the class of 2023. On the flip side, 2024, you have the number 1 ranked offensive tackle according to Rivals.com, and Ian Moore from New Palestine, Indiana, already committed for that class. So you do have at least some momentum for the future.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think that's something to be excited about. I just know that when Justin Fry came in, I think people were expecting to see probably more immediate results on the recruiting trail, maybe than Ohio State has right now. I agree with you. I like this class a lot, but I guess maybe what I would say to that is that the level of engagement in offensive line recruiting is significantly ramped up, and you can tell me if I'm wrong on that, but that's how it feels to me. And I think that will eventually yield results, combined with Paris Johnson. And even if DeJuan Jones is not a first-round pick, I think he's got a really good shot to be like a second-round pick, or at worst a day 2 pick. So you're finally going to have that draft development to point toward for that position too. So I think it's coming. But maybe this class leaves a little something to be desired. When there were, it wasn't a tremendously good tackle class nationally. I don't think. But the handful of like bigger name guys that Ohio State did kind of go after or have some interest in, obviously are not coming here. But I still think there's reason to like this class. I like Luke Montgomery quite a bit, and his versatility, I think, is something that's hard to find at that position. And we'll see what Miles Walker becomes. I find myself infatuated by prospects like that who are sort of raw but have all the measurables you'd like to see. And I think Ohio State's had pretty good success turning those guys into good players. So we'll see what he becomes down the road. But yeah, no 5-star tackle this cycle, but I do think that's about to change.
Well, again, and as I said, that position, it's so hard to find 5-star tackles anyway. And in this new world of college football, the battle for those commitments is much different than it used to be. Mm-hmm. You need, for Ohio State, it has to be guys like Nick Petit-Frere from high schools like Tampa, Berkeley, where you have the belief that kid is driven by something more than just, initial monopoly money. And so that changed the entire cycle for Ohio State. I mean, it really did. It changed the conversations, it changed the priorities, it changed who they thought they could really get involved with. And we can go back to the conversation Andrew and I had on Talking Stuff 7, 10, 12 days ago. It really sort of kickstarted this entire NIL madness that we've seen in the last week and a half since, but around Ohio State media, is that the Buckeyes are going to have to make some decisions about how they adjust moving forward and what they're willing to do and what they're not willing to do. And obviously you and Austin talked at length with Gene Smith about that on Friday on the Podcast Daily. And it doesn't seem like the program, at least front facing, wants to acknowledge that there is a major difference in philosophy in Columbus than there is pretty much everywhere else. And I understand standing on principle and saying this is who we are. But I also understand that the fan base and even the administrators are not going to allow mediocrity to happen for very long. And so there will be a moment when everything has a seismic shift, I think, unfortunately. So one way or the other, like either someone's going to get involved, the Congress is going to get involved, the NCAA is actually going to do something. Maybe it's the IRS that saves the day. Who knows? Maybe those extra 88,000 agents will finally do some good. Could be anything. I don't know. But the point is someone's going to have to do something. Otherwise, Ohio State's going to have to do something and become, a better, more fully operational Death Star, I guess.
Yeah, I think ultimately that's going to be in Ohio State's court. Maybe something. I know Gene Smith is holding on the hope for some kind of national legislation. If that happens, I don't think it's imminent. I don't think the NCAA is ever going to do anything. And Ohio State still has a really good recruiting class. Like, it's still going to be a top 5-ish kind of class, but they're used to contending for number 1 overall, even if they haven't quite gotten there. So you could look at this as a small step back, and maybe that is enough of a splash of cold water, maybe to make some people here in Columbus make some different decisions on how they want to approach things. It's not like they're not doing anything. They're doing quite a bit. Like, Ohio State NIL opportunities are pretty robust once you're here. But it's the upfront stuff. It's the stuff for the prospects that they admit they're lagging behind. So what needs to change for that to not be the case? It probably starts with Ohio State as opposed to waiting for somebody else to help them.
Yeah, and that probably starts in the class of 2024 because the class of 2023 is just about over. It's Monday. It is December the 19th. The early signing period starts on Wednesday, the 21st, runs through Friday, the 23rd. If you're an Ohio State fan looking ahead, you're looking at really 4 or 5 guys. You're looking at, will Caleb Downs flip from Alabama? Right now, seems unlikely, but the Buckeyes don't believe they're out of it yet. They do think that there's at least a small chance he could wake up on Wednesday and change his mind. Then there's Mateo Uyangalele, the 5-star defensive end from St. John Bosco out in California. That is the high school that produced Wyatt Davis and Court Williams. So Ohio State has good relationships there. They're hoping to win that battle over USC and Oregon. Then you have Joshua Mickens, the edge prospect from Indianapolis. He will sign a letter of intent this week, but will not announce it until January 7th. So even if he does sign with Ohio State this week, you will not hear about it officially. And then the real question is, what does Ohio State do with the 2 guys, Kayan Lee and Jelani Thurman, who have been sort of on the fence and flirting with Auburn pretty hard in the last month and a half or 2 months? If they can hold on to both of those guys, there's a very good and real chance that all 20 of Ohio State's commitments will sign on Wednesday. And then you just see if you can add 3 more, get to that 23 number that or so. And then from there, you backfill in the transfer portal in January. There is the question, of course, about Lamar Sperling at running back, who is now sort of taking on some interest from Ohio State. and Bill, before we get out of here, this is the last guy I think we should talk about, just because he did make an unofficial visit to Columbus over the weekend. This is Mr. Football in Ohio. He's committed to Buffalo. He has 2 offers, and they're from Buffalo and Kentucky. And you and I each have an offer from Kentucky. So it's not rare for anybody who's spent time in Ohio to get an offer from Vince Marrow and the Wildcats. But 5'10", 190 pounds. And this season at Akron Hoban High School, a Division II school in Ohio, it's not a bad level of football. One of the better programs in the state from a strength and conditioning standpoint, from a development standpoint of making sure it's not just kids playing football for fun and not actually learning how to be good young men. He ran for 3,800 yards and scored 58 touchdowns on the ground in one season. That's stupid. That's an absurd number in 13 games. That's nearly 300 yards a game. Yeah. And what? I'm not real good at math. 58 touchdowns in 13 games. That's over 4 touchdowns a game.
It's a lot. It's a lot of touchdowns per game. Yeah.
He did visit Ohio State this weekend. Ohio State's still looking for a running back in the class of 2023 after the decommitment of Mark Fletcher about a month ago that really kickstarted a lot of this NIL drama for the Buckeyes. They're going to take a running back. The question is, do you go get a guy like this? Do you look at a guy like in the transfer portal? Is there someone out there that makes a lot of sense? What's fascinating to me is just when you look at Sperling, I go back to the 2020 class when Ohio State thought that they were in a position to get a commitment from both Jalen Knighton and Bijan Robinson, and got one from neither, and ended up having to wait till basically November to recruit Mayan Williams, who everyone thought, oh, this is what you got to settle on, Mayan Williams. And then now everyone's like, please play Mayan Williams more. Why isn't Mayan Williams playing? Mayan Williams, save us. So running back to me is the easiest position in football to come in and make a difference because it requires less of you than pretty much any other position. Hold on to the ball, run the ball, and that's about pretty much it. I want you to, and I again, we don't, plan any of this. So I'm sure you haven't watched much of Sperling's tape, but I'd like for you to put in some eyes on him and see what you see, because this is a kid who's really got some wiggle and some vision. So just a name to watch maybe this week. If Ohio State offers him on Monday or Tuesday after his visit this weekend, then you may have an opportunity for just a signing day, like surprise with a kid like that. Otherwise, they'd really like it if he would wait until February so they can sort of take a step back and get a full measure of what's around college football in the portal and see who else doesn't sign this week so they can begin some more in-depth evaluations.
I have watched him a little bit because he's a guy that you wrote about some, so I wanted to make sure that I got a feel for what he does. I love players like him. I understand why Ohio State can't take a lot of lower-ranked Ohio prospects, but I tend to believe they should have room for 1 or 2 every year, and this kid I think fits the bill if they wanted to go that direction. And also too, like you know, he has 2 offers, Buffalo and Kentucky, and I know Kentucky just offers everyone in Ohio, as you alluded to. Kentucky's a pretty good program when it comes to evaluating under the radar running backs, and Buffalo I think historically has been too, although it's under a different coaching staff now. So that would still mean a little something to me that those are the 2 programs that said, that this is the kid that's worth us extending an offer. And Ohio State evaluates running backs well too. So I would have no issue. But what
are the rest of the MAC schools around Ohio doing?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's a greater philosophical question. I think a lot of people would ask that about every position every year with some of the ways these MAC programs recruit. They just seem to overlook Ohio kids sometimes. I'm not really sure why, because you could build a really good MAC program out of all Ohio kids if you wanted
crazy.
No, Sperling is interesting to me. It's very reminiscent of the Mayan Williams recruitment. It's not to say that it would play out the same way, but I like when Ohio State takes a shot on kids like that.
Yeah, and we'll see if they do. Like I said, he'd visit on Saturday with his family. I'll try to have an update on him from his mouth directly on ohiostate.rivals.com, hopefully on Monday, so we can get some sort of input as to where things may be trending in that direction. But other than that, signing day is 48 hours away. I will be covering it, as will Austin and Bill in some degree. We'll all be at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center on Wednesday at some point. We don't know when. But before then, we'll be at Roosters on Old Tangi River Road about 11:30 on Monday morning, and enjoying the live show there with Bobby Carpenter, Justin Zwick, and Nicole Cox. So if you're in the area, please stop by. If you're not, just check for it on YouTube and all of the podcast platforms later in the day. That's about it for me, Bill. I hope you had a great day, and I hope we'll see you then.
I'll be there. Yeah.
Great. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. See you guys later.